Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, 14 soldiers have been killed after the Taliban attacked a security checkpost in northern Jozjan province. Government officials said 5 others were wounded in the attack. They said Afghan forces killed 7 Taliban fighters in retaliation. The Taliban have rejected reports of a ceasefire with the US. Earlier, a news agency reported the Taliban's ruling council has agreed to a temporary ceasefire in the war-torn country. But the Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen declared the reports false. He said if any such action will be taken, its details will be shared with the public and media directly. India has amended its Army Act to appoint its outgoing Chief of Army Staff, General Bipin Rawat, as the Chief of Defence Staff. The amendments allowed the extension of services for any general officer to be appointed as the Chief of Defence Staff. The retirement age of the Chief of Defence Staff has also been stretched to 65 years. This comes just a day before Rawat's retirement. Meanwhile, countrywide protests against the controversial citizenship law are continuing in India. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee will lead a protest march against the act today in the Purulia district. The all-women sit-in against the act remains ongoing in New Delhi. Meanwhile, Bharatiya Janata Party Minister Ramesh Pokhriyal has threatened students who take part in the protests. The minister said the government will not tolerate educational institutions being turned into political hubs. In a related development, foreign diplomats in India have expressed concern and unease with the Modi government's controversial Citizenship Act. Speaking to media, the envoy said the recent events suggest New Delhi is intolerant of criticism and dissent. The diplomat said New Delhi has not briefed them on the law. They said the bill and the police crackdown on protesters have made their countries question India's commitment to shared values. Earlier, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Bangladesh's foreign and home ministers cancelled trips to India because of the unrest. 27 people have been killed across the country in protests against the new act, which is seen as anti-Muslim. Iran has strongly condemned the US airstrikes in Iraq and Syria against the Tehran-backed Kataib Hezbollah militia. Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Musavi says US military aggression against the Iraqi forces is a clear example of terrorism. Lebanon's Hezbollah and Yemen's Houthi rebels also condemned the attack, but the Iran-backed Syrian government has not yet commented on the strikes. Iraqi President Barham Saleh decried the attacks as unacceptable and damaging. He said the strikes are contrary to security agreements inked between Baghdad and Washington. Earlier, the US said the strikes were conducted in response to the killing of an American contractor in Kirkuk. Meanwhile, in Iraq, hundreds of demonstrators took to the streets in Baghdad and Najaf to protest against Asad al-Idani's nomination for Prime Minister. Students marched alongside protesters, calling for the betterment of the country's economy and services. Protesters demand an overhaul of the corrupt political system, which they say keeps the citizens in poverty. Earlier, demonstrators broke into the Nasiriyah oil field and forced employees in the control room to cut off the field's power supply. President Barham Saleh has already refused to accept the nomination of Asad al-Idani as Prime Minister. Over 450 people have been killed since the wave of civil unrest began on the 1st of October. We now move on to Kuwait, which says it respects Iran's territorial integrity a day after Tehran summoned its envoy to lodge a protest. In a meeting with Iran's ambassador, Mohammad Irani, Kuwait's Deputy Foreign Minister Khalid al-Jarrallah stressed that his country's foreign policy is based on respecting sovereignty. State media said the Deputy Foreign Minister assured the Iranian envoy of non-interference in Tehran's internal affairs. Earlier, Iran said it summoned Kuwait's envoy to register protest against a meeting of its officials with a separatist group. Jarrallah told Iran's ambassador that the meeting took place without the permission from the relevant Kuwaiti authorities. He said officials have begun taking necessary legal measures over the affair, which was undertaken in a private capacity. Israel has decided to withhold $43 million in tax handovers to Palestine. Tel Aviv claims Palestinians have used the funds to support the families of slain or wounded militants. The total amount of the money withheld now equals 7% of the tax funds due to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians say the payments are needed to help vulnerable families affected by violence and the Israeli occupation. Under interim peace deals, Israel collects taxes on behalf of the Palestinians. With diplomacy stalled since 2014, Israel has at times withheld money as the measure of protest or pressure. North Korea has called for positive and offensive measures to safeguard the country's sovereignty and security ahead of the year-end deadline for talks with the U.S. State media says leader Kim Jong-un suggested action in foreign affairs, the defense industry, and the armed forces. Kim led a weekend meeting of senior Workers' Party officials to discuss policy during rising regional tensions. State media said the leader also discussed state management and economic issues. It said he called for the grave state of industrial sectors of the national economy to be urgently corrected. Earlier, U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said the situation in North Korea is dangerous and concerning. In a related development, UN Security Council members will meet informally today in the second round of negotiations on a joint Russian-Chinese proposal to lift sanctions on North Korea. Beijing and Moscow are setting up negotiations a day before North Korea's deadline for the US to show flexibility in stalled denuclearization talks. A Security Council diplomat has accused Russia and China of coordinating the draft resolution with North Korea. The two veto-wielding powers say they hope lifting some sanctions could help break the deadlock and encourage talks between Washington and Pyongyang. But the US, France, and Britain say now is not the time to lift the curbs. In Somalia, 4 al-Shabaab militants have been killed in the U.S. airstrikes. In a statement, the U.S. Africa Command said it carried out 3 airstrikes in the vicinity of Kunia Barrow and Kalio Barrow. It said the raids were carried out with the Somalian government targeting militants who had attacked innocent civilians. The strikes came after a truck bombing in Mogadishu killed at least 80 people. U.S. strikes in Somalia surged after President Donald Trump declared the country's southern territory an area of active hostilities. Bolivia's former president, Jorge Cuguero, has accused Spain's acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of intent to colonize the Andean nation. Quiroga said they would turn to South America's multilateral groups to denounce this attempt to harm Bolivia's democratic reconstruction. He urged Spain's Sanchez to stay away from Bolivia's affairs. Quiroga acts as a delegate to the international community of Bolivia and is a critic of deposed President Evo Morales.
Pedro Sanchez is looking to form a government over there in Spain. He has enormous difficulties, we know that. But don't look to fix your internal governance, Mr. Pedro Sanchez, at the cost of colonizing our country, Bolivia, with modern invasions.
Meanwhile, Spanish officials involved in a diplomatic incident left Bolivia yesterday. They were accused of trying to help former high-ranking members of the Morales' administration escape the country. Now moving on, Greece says if the talks with Turkey on a maritime dispute fail, it will take the matter to the International Court of Justice. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis says he will discuss the dispute on a political and diplomatic level. Earlier, Cyprus petitioned the ICJ to safeguard its offshore mineral rights. UNCLOS signed a maritime accord with Tripoli last month that seeks to create an exclusive economic zone from the Turkey's southern shore to Libya's northeast coast. Greece and Cyprus say the deal is void and violates international law. In a rather embarrassing development, Canada has deported dozens of Indian students over forgery of academic documents. In a video, the students can be seen waiting at the Toronto Pearson International Airport. Students submitted fake English language tests for admissions in different Canadian universities. Facebook has blocked the Pakistan Broadcasting Corporation's live stream for highlighting human rights abuses in occupied Kashmir. The valley is under an Indian-imposed clampdown for the last 148 days. State media said the social media platform alleged the transmission violated its community standards. The Pakistani government and media have been raising their voices for the occupied valley at all the platforms, including the UN, the EU, and the OIC. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus News. Welcome back. In China, 11 people have been killed in two separate incidents in southwest Chongqing and northern Shaanxi province. Officials say 5 people were killed in a coal mine accident in Shaanxi's Shuzhou city and 6 others in a building fire in Chongqing Fuling district. The Shuzhou authorities said a landslide occurred around midnight in the coking coal mine, trapping 6 people. They said an investigation into the cause of the accident is underway. Moving on to Mexico, where 11 people have been killed and 7 others injured after a car collided with a van carrying tourists in the southeastern state of Chiapas. Officials say the accident happened when the car crossed to the opposite lane and crashed into the bus on a busy highway. They said the bus was traveling from the border town of Tapachula. It was carrying a family on their way to the mountain town of San Cristobal de las Casas for vacation. Moving on to the U.S., where a man has shot 2 people dead during a church service in Texas before being killed by an armed member of the congregation. Officials say another parishioner is in critical condition. Health officials say 1 person died at the crime scene and the one on his way to the hospital. Police said they are still trying to determine the attacker's motives. The shooting was captured on video because the service was being streamed. The United Nations says millions of children across the world are entering a new decade having faced the devastating consequences of violence in conflict zones. The United Nations Children's Agency said it has documented 170,000 violations against minors since 2010. It said the violations include killing, maiming, abduction, sexual abuse, and recruitment into armed groups. UNICEF Executive Director Henrietta Fore said the attacks on children and young people continue unabated, with the combatants ignoring the basic laws of war. In Brazil, a conflict is brewing between indigenous people and settlers hoping to make a living off the land. The government wants to expand agriculture and mining, but the forest is in the way. Details in this report.
A trail of chopped-down trees cuts through the protected indigenous land. This site is familiar by now to Tachi, a chief of the Arara people in the northern Brazilian Amazon.
It's sad when you see the trees lying on the ground like that. That piece of wood is already dead.
Criminals strike easily from the nearby Trans-Amazonian highway. But after President Jair Bolsonaro's election in October, the logging only picked up. Frustrated and defiant, Tachi and his warriors resort to extreme measures. Bit by bit, they eat the forest smaller, sometimes killing those who stand in their way. Leaders from the Arara and other tribes hit out at the invasions in a recent meeting with a senior cabinet minister.
I am a chief. I will die if you kill my land, but I will fight for my people.
Invaders feel emboldened by the new far-right president's talk, the leaders said. Bolsonaro spurns indigenous people's culture and a right to land they won after centuries of oppression. But his emissary, General Carlos Santos Cruz, said the government is not encouraging crime.
That is absurd. The invasion of any land, the occupation of any area, indigenous or not, or private, is criminal.
Deforestation levels reached a decade high in Brazil last year. But the forest protection is a life and death struggle, especially for activists. Brazil has one of the world's highest rates of murder in land conflicts.
In Australia, a volunteer firefighter in New South Wales has died while more than 100 bushfires are still burning across the continent. At least 10 people have been killed in the bushfires so far. The volunteer died and 2 others suffered burns when their truck was overturned by extreme winds during the raging fire. The blaze is also killing native fauna and driving animals out of the bushland into the people's homes. In the meantime, tens of thousands of residents in southwestern Victoria state have been told to evacuate. The fires have destroyed 4 million hectares in 5 states since September. About a bitter cold has swept across Pakistan as temperature plunged below zero in many areas. The Pakistan Met Department recorded the temperature at negative 21 degrees Celsius in northern Sakardu city, bringing a 25-year-old record. The department said the water bodies in Skardu have frozen and intermittent snowfall blocked the city's main connecting roads. Meanwhile, the temperature in Astor city was recorded at -7, -5 in Hunza and 4 degrees Celsius in the capital, Islamabad. The department said the dense fog will continue to disrupt air, rail and road traffic. In Pakistan, air quality has varied between bad and hazardous in 223 days of this year. Tired of choking on putrid air, people have taken up the challenge to beat the smog by developing their own purifiers. There's more about their struggle in this report.
Pakistan has just experienced its worst smog crisis this winter. The poor air quality has put tens of thousands of people at risk of respiratory disease.
Pakistan is facing problems, especially Lahore and around the city of Lahore. That is, you can say maximum 250 quality index pollution level.
Research by Gates Foundation suggests that 125,000 people die each year in Pakistan because of air pollution. Taking things into his own hands, activist Hassan Zaidi has produced homemade, low-cost devices to cope with the toxic smog. The domestically designed purifiers are cheaper than imported models.
To start with, it was originally designed to just serve my own purpose. But I saw that a lot of people were asking me about them and awareness was growing nationwide.
Public awareness of the issue is growing, fueled by increased activism on social media about the twin menaces of climate change and air pollution.
Stock markets in Europe are trading lower ahead of the new year amid a lack of triggers. Investor sentiments is positive while they wait on further details for a trade deal between the US and China. Frankfurt's DAX is trading over 0.5% lower during a lack of triggers. London's FTSE 100 has lost a fraction as investors booked profits from this month's rally. The CAC 40 in Paris is also trading fractionally lower. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite traded over 1% higher and closed at an 8-month high. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 lost over 0.5% amid weak economic indicators. International oil prices retreated and are now trading flat. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.